Japan struggles to cope with the Fukushima nuclear crisis. There are growing fears that history is repeating itself. We're now joined by an independent journalist, James Corbett. He's from Osaka in Japan. James, good to have you here on RT. Now, the Fukushima crisis has hit the same severity rating as Chernobyl. There are fears, as I said, that history is repeating itself there in Japan. Many say that the world has failed to learn the lessons on nuclear safety. Would you agree with that?
Well, I think there are lessons to be learned, but it's important to understand that the analogy between Chernobyl and Fukushima is not a strict one. And from a technological standpoint, the disasters are quite different. The reactors were built differently. They withstood different types of calamities, and the response is necessarily going to be different. But I think the real analogy to be drawn here is the flow of information that's coming from the government, and it's not an analogy that favors the Japanese government. We saw in the wake of the immediate wake of the Chernobyl disaster, we saw the official Soviet reaction was to attempt to cover up and deny what was going on. But once it became apparent the scale and scope of what was happening, we saw that kickstart a new era of glasnost and openness. Whereas we see the exact opposite thing happening here with the Japanese government reaction to what's happening. And unfortunately, we see the Japanese government trying to assert an even tighter control over the flow of information coming out of Fukushima.
So whatever information you're getting there in Japan, you're there in the country, is there a feeling of optimism that this crisis could be over by the end of the year, according to the government? Or is there still mistrust there in the country over what the government's saying?
I think there is a high degree of mistrust going on, because I think the government has proven that it's not interested in giving a free and open access to the site or to the information coming out of there. And it's a remnant of the infamous Keisha Club, press club system here, whereby only a certain handful of organizations get privileged access to Japanese government sources. And amazingly enough, that's pertaining even during this disaster, even as the Chief Cabinet Secretary Eidano is giving twice daily briefings on what's happening at Fukushima. Those briefings are only open to the select group of Japanese media organizations. Foreign media and independent journalists are being excluded from those meetings and are only getting access to secondhand information from administrative sources. So there is an incredible attempt to try to cover up the flow of information and to control what kind of information is getting out.
But won't this attitude, sorry to interrupt you, but won't that attitude from the government backfire on them? I mean, what's the political fallout going to be from the government over this, do you think?
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that, because of course the Japanese populace is generally quite complacent and used to this type of thing. I think it's surprising for foreign media that might not be aware of how this works, but the Japanese government has a vested interest in trying to cover up this scale and extent of what's happening at Fukushima, because the Nuclear and Industrial Safety Agency, which is supposedly the watchdog here that's regulating the nuclear power industry, is a subset of the Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, which itself is beholden to the nuclear power interests. It's there to promote atomic energy in the country. So the Japanese government does not want the full extent of what's happening at Fukushima to get out.
Well, you're there in the south of the country. I've had a number of experts today saying this crisis is far from over. Indeed, worse could still happen. Do you feel safe?
At this point, I don't think there's a cause for panic, but it's certainly not a safe, stable situation, and I am thinking seriously of leaving the country, as I think a lot of people here are, certainly the foreign population here in Japan is, and I certainly agree that this situation could become a lot worse. So
there you are, thinking of possibly leaving. Looking in the long term, what could be the consequences of this disaster? Not the radioactivity problem, but the actual economic consequences and the long-term effects on the Japanese people.
Well, for the economic consequences, we already know that the debt-to-GDP ratio in Japan is the worst of any developed nation in the world, and we can only imagine it's going to get worse, even as the reports are coming out that the Japanese government bonds are now not being bought by the National Pension Fund here in the same extent as before. So issuing bonds to try to pay for the reconstruction is not necessarily going to work. So I can't see this economically being in a good situation at all, or playing out that way. But we'll have to see how things play out that way. But for radioactivity, I think this is an ongoing situation that is only getting worse. And reports out today indicate that radioactivity in the seawater near Fukushima is now nearing all-time world record highs. There has only been one case of radioactivity being reported higher in seawater anywhere in the world. So it's very much a volatile situation.
Very interesting to hear what you have to say there in the country affected, there in Osaka. James Corbett, independent journalist, joining us live on RT. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.